Everything didn't start with a scream, or a fight, or a dramatic scene. It started with one short message on her laptop that I saw by accident, a message I was never meant to see. I just lifted the lid to find a work document. The screen lit up, and the first thing that appeared was a notification. From her boss. The text was short, but half a sentence was enough. "We really shouldn't talk about last night here." Those 7 words destroyed my life faster than any disaster ever could. It felt like a blow to the head, precise, cold, and without warning. I froze, as if time had stopped. Everything I knew about my wife, our marriage, our life, it all seemed to dissolve right in front of me. In that moment, I understood. What I thought was solid could collapse in a second. And it was especially cruel because until that moment, we had everything. Not almost everything, not sort of everything, but exactly everything. Like those American commercials about the perfect family. We lived in the suburbs of Seattle, in a house with panoramic windows, a view of the pines, and a small yard where she grew strawberries. In the mornings, I heard her humming something in the kitchen while she made coffee. We had a dog, a golden retriever she called our eldest son. Every weekend, we went somewhere. In summer, we drove to Olympic National Park, hiked the trails, and took photos of waterfalls. In fall, we toured the wineries in Woodinville, arguing about which varietal was better. In winter, we rented a cabin near Snoqualmie, played board games, and roasted marshmallows in the fireplace. We traveled. We'd been to San Diego, Cape Cod, Lake Tahoe. We drove along the California coast in a rented convertible, shouting from the wind and laughing when we got lost near Big Sur. The photos hang in our hallway, or rather, hung. I don't even know what to do with them now. We made plans, talked about a smaller house by the water, about how someday we'd buy a trailer and disappear for a month, just driving wherever we wanted, about how old age should be calm but interesting. I believed every word she said. I believed we were walking the same road. Our life was stable. I worked in IT, she worked in the office of a large company. We had savings, insurance, vacations twice a year, family dinners on Fridays, summer barbecues with the neighbors. No fights, no suspicions, no red flags. I thought we were a team. That's why the message hurt so much. It didn't just break the marriage, it broke my sense of reality. I stared at the screen, and one thought kept repeating in my head. How long has this been going on? And then came a sinking feeling in my chest, the kind you can't mistake for anything else. The end. Quiet, cold, sudden. The life I thought was solid as concrete turned out to be as thin as paper. And that paper tore because of one single pop-up notification. In that moment, I understood. After this, we would never be the same. And maybe we would never be together at all. After that message, I began to revisit the past few months, and everything that once seemed like ordinary schedule changes suddenly turned into a chain of precise signals. She started staying late at work abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. On Monday, her usual hours. On Tuesday, we stayed late discussing strategy. On Wednesday, the boss asked me to remain. On Thursday, don't wait up. In all the years together, she had never worked like that. And it stood out even more because our life had always been predictable and structured, like an Amtrak timetable. Every Tuesday, we went to our favorite diner in Bellevue, the one with walls covered in photos of athletes from the 70s, and we always ordered the same thing. Turkey club for her, chili bowl for me. These past months, she canceled almost every dinner because of work. On Saturdays, we used to go to Lincoln Park with the dog. It was our tradition, take-out coffee, a long walk along the shore, conversations about future trips. But in recent months, the walks disappeared. She said she wanted some time alone, that she needed to rest, and would go to the bedroom with her laptop. She started dressing differently. Not just a new blouse, a complete shift of style, abrupt, as if she no longer worked in an office, but in a Fortune 500 presentation department. Makeup, professional hairstyling, several expensive accessories she had never worn before. And all this without any visible reason. Her phone changed too. Before, it lay around anywhere, on the couch, in the car, in the kitchen. Now, always face down, always with her, not a single notification near me. And most importantly, she only replied to messages after leaving the room. She used to show me her work chats, funny comments from coworkers. These last months, nothing. As if she had developed a separate digital life. Even our trips changed. A year ago, we could easily hop in the car on a Saturday, drive to Port Angeles, buy fish at the pier, watch the ferries leaving for Victoria. She loved those spontaneous trips. Now, don't want to, I'm tired, maybe another time, too much work. I remember one very specific moment. We were driving to Costco for the usual shopping, coffee, paper towels, dog food. Before, these trips turned into little adventures. We laughed, talked about plans, debated brands. That evening she sat in the car silently, her hands tense, her gaze empty. I asked if everything was okay. She said, yes. Her tone was even, but absolutely hollow. Another moment. She stopped leaving her work bag wherever it landed. Before, she could toss it on the couch. Now, the bag was always closed, always in the same spot by the closet, like a safe. And then, the evening with the co-workers' dinner. Before, she always invited me. She liked when I was there. She liked introducing me, joking, sharing what she heard in the office. But this time there was no invitation at all. She left alone, returned late, and her answer fine to my "how was it?" was so short it was as if the dinner hadn't happened at all. Taken together, all those changes looked like a new reality I was no longer allowed into. And the worst part, now I could see one thing clearly. All of this had begun long before that message. I just hadn't connected the dots. But after that night, the dots began to connect on their own. Quickly, harshly, with no chance to shut my eyes to them. The first blow came from the way she reacted to simple, everyday things that had once been part of our life. One day I suggested we go to Trader Joe's, just to stock up for the week, nothing special. It used to be our little ritual. She picked her favorite red wine. I grabbed that same pasta we always cooked on Fridays. But now she replied curtly, I don't have time, just order delivery. It wasn't about the groceries. It was about the fact that she no longer needed our shared habits. Then came a conversation over dinner. I asked, how was your day? Before, she told me everything. Who came late to work, who ruined whose nameplate on the office door, who went on maternity leave. Now, a 2-second pause and a short, fine, a pause, and immediately a change of subject. And then something happened that finally blew the lid off everything I had been trying to keep contained. I stopped by her office unexpectedly. I just wanted to pick her up early and plan a spontaneous dinner, the way we used to. But when I texted her, I'm outside, come out, the reply came instantly. Don't. I'm busy. Presentation. I'll leave on my own. Too fast. Too sharp. That's not how you respond when you're happy to see someone. I sat in the car and watched silhouettes in the windows, watched employees walking out. She didn't come out. Not after 10 minutes, not after 20. Only an hour later, when I had already left. That was the first time I felt not just worry, but a clear, icy realization. She was hiding something. And then came another moment, small, but too characteristic to ignore. Her coworker, whom I'd known for a couple of years, casually said when we ran into each other, yeah, your wife and the boss have been inseparable lately. They do everything together. He said it without a hint, without innuendo, just a normal comment. But it hit exactly the spot that was already burning. I smiled back, as if it didn't affect me, as if it didn't punch me in the chest so hard I lost my breath. He kept talking about some reports, but I wasn't hearing anything anymore. At that moment I realized, my suspicions weren't emotions. They were observations, facts, real changes in behavior. And the more I remembered, the more clearly I saw the entire line. She left earlier than me, came back later. She lived by a schedule I didn't know. And most importantly, she no longer lived in our shared schedule. That was the moment when suspicion stops being suspicion, when the mind can no longer protect the heart from the truth. I understood. I was standing at the edge where a real investigation begins. Not in a movie, not in a show, but in my own life. And there was no way back. But I didn't want to turn into a detective. I didn't want to live with the constant feeling of surveillance. I simply began paying more attention to our life, to the places where my eyes had never lingered before. And that, perhaps, was the most frightening part. Not that I was searching for clues, but that ordinary, everyday moments suddenly began to sound different. For example, our evenings at home. We used to spend them the same way every time. Simple American routine, but it was exactly what held us together as a couple. After work, we changed into comfortable clothes, turned on the TV, watched the local news, discussed how the Seattle mayor raised taxes again, or how I-5 was jammed once more, as if that was anything new. She sat on the couch, tucking her legs under herself, and I brought her tea. That was our quiet zone, a ritual nobody touched. But now she more and more often went to the bedroom to finish a couple of emails. And I sat alone in front of the TV, listening to some late-night host joke about politics while she wasn't next to me. And because of that, the same house felt slightly emptier than it should have. On weekends, we used to go out without any plan. Sometimes to Best Buy to look at gadgets we weren't going to buy. Sometimes to Lowe's for a single light bulb. And then we wandered through the aisles as if picking furniture for a new home. Sometimes just drove around the neighborhood, watching neighbors change their Halloween decorations. Ordinary little things, but they were the fabric of our marriage. Now, everything was different. She more often said, "I think I'll stay home." And I went alone and saw other couples choosing appliances, laughing, debating wallpaper colors. And every time the same thought flashed in my mind. We used to do that too. Even at work, I began noticing that her behavior affected mine. Before, I could focus all day on tasks, lead meetings, discuss projects. Now I caught myself staring out the window thinking about what she was doing, with whom, why her voice on the phone had changed. Coworkers asked, "Are you okay?" I answered, "Yeah, just tired." That was only half the truth. The strangest part was how our dinners out changed. We used to go off into a small restaurant by the water in West Seattle. They had huge portions of fish and the best bread I'd ever eaten. We sat by the window, looking at the city lights, and she always ordered the same thing, a walnut salad and white wine. It was our little corner of calm. But in recent months, those evenings nearly disappeared. And if they did happen, she looked as though she wanted to be there physically, but not mentally. Her gaze drifted somewhere beyond the glass, where there were no bay and no city lights. There was another life I didn't yet have access to. Even around the house, small changes began appearing. She started arranging her things more neatly than usual, as if she were preparing to leave, as if being afraid to leave something behind had become normal for her. Before, she tossed her jacket onto the chair in the hallway. Now she hung it in the closet. Before, her work laptop lay wherever. Now it was always closed and carefully kept out of sight. I didn't turn it into drama. I didn't make scenes. I didn't ask too many questions. I simply watched our habitual life continue to flow while its channel quietly shifted. And what scared me most wasn't what was happening, but how naturally she adapted to her new way of living. Without me, while I held on to the old routines, she was already living in new ones. And in that silence, in those small details, in those altered everyday scenes, I slowly began to understand. The truth was approaching, and it would be different from what I imagined. After several weeks of watching in quiet shifts, I understood one thing. Our life was still held together by routine, but the feelings were no longer there. And I was simply waiting for the moment when everything would become so clear that pretending would no longer be possible. That moment arrived in the most ordinary way, almost too ordinary. No loud scene, no dramatic twist. A normal Wednesday evening. She came home earlier than usual. That alone was strange. For the last few months, she had always been late. But that day, everything looked as if she had planned the right time to come home. She walked in silently and set her bag down by the door. I was sitting in the living room, watching the local news, a report about traffic on I-5, and yet another scandal in the school district. A typical American evening. She walked past me without even glancing at the screen. Simply said, "Hi." Neutral, as if I were a neighbor, not the man she had shared 20 years of her life with. I suggested making dinner together. She used to love those moments. We cooked pasta, argued about who oversalted the sauce, laughed while wiping spills off the counter. It was our way of becoming us again. She looked at me as if I'd said something out of place. "Not today. I'm not hungry." And went upstairs. I didn't yet know that this dinner, the one that never happened, would become the starting point for our honest conversation. But I already felt something inside tightening. Later she came downstairs with her laptop, almost as if to show, "I have things to do." She sat at the table and began typing. Very fast, very focused, like someone who wants to appear busy even if work isn't what really matters. I pretended to watch TV, but I heard every movement. How she typed in her password. How she closed tabs when I walked by. How she angled the screen so I couldn't see it. And it didn't irritate me as an investigator. It hurt as a husband who remembered how she used to show me funny emails from coworkers, share office drama, laugh at corporate chats. Now, It was as if she needed to guard every pixel of her screen. After a while, she stood up, took her phone, and said, "I need to make a call. Work stuff," and went outside. She never used to talk outside if it was windy. She hated the cold blowing into her hood. But now she left for 20 minutes, closing the door quietly, as if hiding the sound. I stood in the kitchen cutting vegetables, even though there would be no dinner, simply trying to keep my hands busy. And I listened as her voice outside grew louder and softer. I couldn't make out words, but the tone, yes. It was different. Not professional. Not friendly. Personal. When she returned, her face was tense but controlled. The face of someone trying to balance two lives at once. She said, "Sorry, we're questions." Before, she would have explained what exactly happened. Now, she just covered the topic and shut the door on the conversation. We sat in the same room, but it felt as if there were miles between us. The TV talked about the weather forecast, the dog slept by my feet, the kitchen smelled of chopped vegetables no one would cook. The routine was the same, but we were living in different realities. And in that moment I realized, I wasn't playing detective. I was a man watching the woman he had spent half his life with walk toward a place where he no longer had a space. It was no longer an investigation. It was preparation for what was soon going to happen. She was holding on to her new life, and I, to the remnants of the old one. And between us grew a silence that only one of us could hear. For now, a breakup doesn't begin with a scream. It begins at the moment when silence becomes too loud to ignore. That day, everything looked ordinary on the surface. Saturday, cold gray Seattle, the smell of rain, the dog waiting by the door for a walk. I was making breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, our usual morning set. She used to come downstairs, hug me from behind, joke about my restaurant ambitions. Today, silence. She came down 20 minutes later, phone in hand, distance on her face. Sat at the table without even looking at me. And suddenly I knew that today was the day when what we had both been avoiding would finally happen. I placed a plate in front of her. She said, "I'm not hungry." Evenly, coldly, as if cutting an invisible thread. I sat across from her. And for the first time in months, I didn't sidestep the truth. I asked directly, without preparation, without gentleness. "Who called you yesterday?" She stopped. Not surprised. Not frightened. She just stopped breathing for a second. And that was enough for me to understand everything. "Work stuff," she said. But her eyes didn't hold. They flickered like glass hit by a sudden change in temperature. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't hit the table. I didn't make a scene. I simply said what I had been piecing together for weeks. "I know you're not spending your evenings at work. I know that your dinner with colleagues wasn't a dinner with colleagues. I know who the person is. I don't need details. I need only one truth. Are you with me? Or are you already there?" She was silent too long. Longer than someone needs to invent an excuse. Longer than someone needs to confess. It was the silence of a person who knows they haven't lost an argument. They've lost everything. Finally, she said, "I didn't want it to turn out like this." That's what people say when everything already turned out like this. When there is no path back. And she knew it. And I knew it. I didn't need explanations. I didn't want them. Any explanation is just an attempt to erase guilt from a past that can't be changed. I got up, walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, took out a suitcase, packed my things calmly, shirts, jeans, a couple of books, a charger. No rush, no drama. Just the understanding that the moment I'd been fearing had arrived. She stood in the doorway. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't try to stop me. She only watched, with the gaze of someone who feels something she believed eternal slipping out of her hands. As I walked past her, she said quietly, "I'm sorry," but her voice held no attempt to bring me back. Only the acknowledgement of what had happened. I placed the suitcase by the front door and looked at our home. The kitchen where we made dinners. The couch where we laughed at old movies. The shelves of photos from our trips. All the little things that had made this life ours. The house still carried the smell of coffee, old books, familiar life. But it no longer had the most important thing. Us. Before leaving, I said, "We lived a good life, but it has no continuation." I closed the door. And for the first time in a long while I felt not pain, but emptiness, ready to accept a new reality. It wasn't a breakup. It was the end of a chapter that cannot be rewritten. When the door closed behind me, I heard, for the first time in 20 years, the real sound of loneliness. Not silence, loneliness. It sounds different. dry, hollow, as if you're standing in an empty hangar where your whole life was stored yesterday, and today only the echo of your own steps remains. I sat in the car, started the engine, and couldn't move. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my body wouldn't respond. And only then it hit me. I was no longer returning to that house, no longer climbing those stairs, no longer hearing her footsteps on the second floor. Everything that had been us was now only me. I drove without a destination, just drifted through Seattle as if the city could give me an answer to a question I couldn't even form. I passed our favorite diner and realized for the first time that I would never go there with her again. Past the park where we walked the dog. The dog stayed with her, and that hurt more than I expected. Past the waterfront where we watched sunsets, and now those sunsets would mean something different to her. I stopped by the bay, sat on a bench. People walked by, couples, families, tourists, runners, retirees with coffee. Each had their own life, their own worries, their own plans for the evening. Only I had no plans left. At some point, I felt something pressing down on me. Not anger, not even pain, but an enormous, heavy exhaustion. Exhaustion from all the attempts to save something that had long been lost. Exhaustion from lies, from hopes, from expectations, from myself. This exhaustion doesn't destroy, it cleans. It leaves only what truly matters. I took off my ring, looked at it. An ordinary piece of metal that had meant everything for 20 years. Now, a symbol of a chapter that ended without a beautiful finale, without applause. It simply ended. In the following weeks, life changed quickly. I rented a small apartment, a quiet street not far from the lake, simple furniture, minimal things. At first, everything felt foreign. A cold refrigerator, an empty bed, evening silence, and my jacket hanging on the single hook by the door. But after some time I noticed that there was something in that emptiness. Something honest. Without expectations, without pretense. You come home, and you know, everything that happens here is real. In the mornings I got coffee at the same Starbucks, but now the baristas asked, "Just you today?" Yes, just me. And for the first time that word didn't sound like a sentence. I started running in the mornings. Not to escape, but to fill my time with something that belonged only to me. And every time I ran past the water, I felt the air becoming a little lighter. Sometimes I caught myself thinking of her, not as a betrayer, but as someone with whom life had once genuinely been good. And there was no pain in it. It felt like watching an old movie. You know you'll never return to that world, but you're grateful it once existed. I began noticing small joys I had never paid attention to before. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery near home. The way the city looks at sunrise. How quiet the apartment is in the evening when no one walks back and forth. How simple it is to sit with a cup of coffee and not think about who owes what to whom. And one day I realized, I didn't want to get the past back. I wanted to build something new, not because I had to, but because I could. I stopped tracking what she was doing. Stopped analyzing her life. Stopped waiting. Stopped comparing. I started living. And suddenly the most important understanding arrived. Betrayal is not the end of your life. It is the end of the part of your life where you lived for two. Now you begin living for yourself. I don't justify her, but I don't hold anger either. Everyone makes their choices. She made hers. I made mine. And if in the past I thought the end of a marriage was a catastrophe, now I know. Sometimes an ending is simply a beginning without lies. Now, when I look back, I don't see failure. I see a path. Difficult, painful, but honest. A path that led me where I needed to be. To a life with no secrets. No double standards. No empty looks over dinner. Just me, my silence, my future, and a freedom I didn't choose, but learned to value.